Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce, separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable, the divorce services company, and host of this, the Divorce Podcast. In this episode, I was joined by Haifa Barbari, who is a relationship coach, author, human behaviour strategist, and founder of Be What Matters, a wonderful self-coaching app. We started by talking about how Haifa helps people who are going through a breakup, and we explored the impact of lockdown on relationships and how it may have accelerated society's disposable mentality. Haifa told me that divorce rates are higher in the first 3 years for those who've met through a dating app, and we discussed the difference between a broken relationship and one that needed work. We also talked about good breakups, and I asked her to explain exactly what is meant by conscious uncoupling. I was really interested in the notion and how it can prepare you for a future with positive, happy relationships. This is a realistic look at life after a breakup. Welcome, Haifa.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming. I'm going to come back to that stat about dating apps and divorce, but let's start, if I may, by talking about what you do, how you help people. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Absolutely. Well, I coach men and women across mainly the UK and the US and in their love lives. And typically people initially come to me after a breakup, which really peaked during the lockdown, and to break their past patterns and find relationships that are authentic, healthy for them, and feel, independent and fulfilled. So yes, I work with both men and women, and I help them overcome their past patterns and get into a healthy relationship.
So you must have seen, I imagine you must have seen a bit of a peak during lockdown. What was it like for people? Did more people end relationships, or did people choose to sit tight, and is it now that they're ending them? Tell me a little bit about the patterns you saw.
It was quite the time on many levels, wasn't it? And when it comes to relationships and what I saw, particularly from February 2020 onwards, 9 out of 10 of the inquiries that I received stated that people had just gone through a breakup. So I think prior to that, people, we were forced into creating a new life in lockdown and mourning the life that we knew at the time. And so people in relationships or people who were single carried on and did their best, hunkered down, for the most part, followed the rules. But then after that, I think it just really made everybody consider their lives, bringing it to the forefront of their mind. Like, is this the life that I want to live? How long do I have left? Is this the right partner? And then after that, Kate, 9 out of 10 of the inquiries were after a breakup.
Right. Because it feels like we just all did a collective stock take, didn't we? And in all different ways. I know that I decided I was going to start dating rather than breaking up with anyone because I've been single for a long time. And I guess it's a point of change, isn't it? Where you decide that you look at your life, as you say, you look at what you've got, what you want. And I guess at that point, people go, whoa, help.
Absolutely. And, breakups, divorce, the two very wide ends of the spectrum there, like breakup with just a partner versus a marriage. It forces people, as painful as it is, it's an opportunity for people to really look at and take stock of what's working, what isn't working. If we can push through that pain and those feelings of failure and all the managing through the societal narratives that we're all working through, there's that opportunity to take ownership and feel more empowered. So it just, with the height of the pandemic, it just forced everybody to just pause and look at their lives, and relationships are one of them.
And just to be clear then, do you work with people who are deciding whether or not to carry on, or are you working with people at the point at which the relationship has broken down and they are decided that that is the end?
Yeah, mostly with people who are looking to find a new relationship, getting over a breakup. However, that said, over the last 2 years, more and more people were coming to me to help coach them through whether to stay or go. And so there was a path and a process of guiding somebody to really be objective about their relationship and find ways to communicate and work through certain challenge points with their partners. So ask me again in a year, because I do wonder if, the dynamic of the clients that come to me will begin to shift, because more and more people are becoming just more conscious about how they approach relationships and conscious about the decisions that they're making. It's less, we live in a world of social media, right, that's quite fickle, and this disposable culture that happens. And I think that one of the good positive impacts of the pandemic is people were questioning whether they are being too fickle or throwing away things too quickly. And so I do wonder if that will begin to change, and more people will seek coaching just to make sure that they're giving people a chance.
Yeah, because we were talking about this in one of the other podcasts about menopause, where we were trying to work out the difference between, a relationship that's in difficulty because the woman is going through menopause versus a relationship that is terminal. So that whole thing, how do you know what's a rough patch that you need to hunker down and steer yourselves through, versus how do you know when there's something fundamentally broken about the relationship, and can a third person help with that? What do you say when people say, I don't know whether to stay or not? What do you get them to reflect on?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that it's come up in other areas too, because, it's important that we get back to a place of, at least for people who were raised with social media as part of their, environment, and not seeing a world prior to, that social environment portraying that there's always something better. And, during the pandemic, there was actually a particular lady that I coached who was asking this particular question. She's now married, and they were, and the other end of the spectrum. But what I try to highlight and remind people, when you're in this world of your own, in this couple bubble, the world becomes quite small, and it's very hard to take a step back and look at things more broadly and give yourself the space to consider the pros and the cons. So one of the first things that I coach and advise on is how to create space between you. And it was really hard when you couldn't go anywhere other than your perhaps 1 or 2 bedroom flat. But the time and the space between the arguments, the conversations, the annoying bits, is really important to then be able to assess whether that is something that you can put up with, or if there's a different approach that you can take. People sometimes forget to build in space. And so one of the first things is how to create the space for you to think more broadly, and also bring that attraction back, because when you're always with somebody, you lose that. So space is really important. So that first step is space and retraining the person that I'm coaching, and then also how they can show up and guide their partner to rebuild a relationship that has space, and creating that space for them to feel safe in having space. Because people often don't want to give each other space because they're worried that someone will leave.
Right. So when you say giving somebody space, you mean encouraging them to go out with friends or going out and pursuing their own interests, so that you're not constantly with that person. You're not doing all of your socializing with your partner. You mean that kind of having your own life, being your own person side of space?
All of the above, exactly. So being okay with having space where the person can be by themselves, maybe go do mundane things by themselves too. You don't always have to be together. So it starts with just being able to be with each other, yet have the space to be alone, whether that's reading by themselves and not feeling like the other person doesn't feel like they're, that the relationship is starting to, deteriorate. So even individually having space, and then yes, pursuing own interests and creating a relationship where there's that balance between doing your own thing, yet coming together. And I always ask successful couples have been to define, we can all define success in our own ways, but couples who are in their 70s have been together more than 40 years. I always ask them, what is the secret? What advice would you give younger couples? And they always say, have your own interests too, so that you can bring them together, but then also be alone and then bring opportunities for you to talk about different things together. So space and own interest is really important.
It sounds like there's a kind of generational aspect to this as well. So the people that you coach, do they tend to be millennial type Gen Z generations, or do you coach a sort of a more diverse range of people?
Diverse range. So from age of 25 to 52, we are facing similar challenges, and the impact of the disposable culture and also assessing what you authentically want happens across the board. But I would also say is happening more quickly than it ever has before.
And do you think that because that is a function of lockdown and what we've been through, so not just lockdown, but the pandemic as a more general thing? Do you think that is what's driving some of this disposability, or is it more about the social media and the way that communication is changing and our attitudes are being shaped by living in sort of echo chambers?
Yeah, I think that while from what I was able to see, the pandemic accelerated key decisions, but across the board and across people that I've coached at different age groups, is that there's this culture of wanting to give up quickly, and this disposable culture because of this fallacy of thinking that there's something better out there. And it's projected on social media, it's projected across multiple different forms of media that, it forces people to look at their lives and think that their lives are not enough. And I think that it's a dangerous space to be, with dating apps as well, actually, because in an instant,
I was going to ask you about that, because you mentioned that. I mentioned that in the intro, didn't I? That you've got this kind of theory, or you've seen a pattern of, I guess, to summarize it would be that the way you meet, so meeting through a dating app, makes you more prone to this disposable culture? Or what? Tell me a little bit about that stat then.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone single or anyone getting back out there, bouncing back, whether you're in your 50s or in your 20s, the way you meet people these days is on dating apps. So even if you're aware and conscious of the impact of social media and multiple options through dating apps, it still happens in the background, because just as easy as with a simple swipe on a dating app, you've potentially got yourself a new match. So what's happening is that people tend to give up too soon. And the Marriage Foundation released some data on the divorce rates with people over the last 20 years meeting through different mediums. And it was higher for people who met on dating apps in the first 3 years. And it just feeds into that theory of...
Sorry, the divorce rate was higher, you mean, for people who met via a dating app in the first 3 years. So if you manage to navigate the first 3 years, then you're back to the same divorce rate as everybody else. But if you're going to come unstuck in the first 3 years, then that's driven by the way that you've met potentially.
Yes. And I think that's because of a bigger social problem going on that we were just talking about. However, if you do get past that, the positive news there, because, the tension point is that it's the way people meet now. It's very rare that you meet people in real life.
Any other way. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So how do we manage this? But yes, if you push past the first 3 years, the statistics were, if you met on a dating app, the divorce rates were lower. After that, more longer term. So because there are pros, to them, you can meet people with similar interests. You can cut through, time wasters. You can find out if you're of the same religion. So lots of pros, but that divorce rate, I truly believe, is within the first 3 years, is part of that bigger social problem we were talking about.
Interesting. And do you think there are special things to take into consideration if you're on that bouncing back side? So, obviously this is the Divorce Podcast. Lots of the people that listen will be going through a divorce or a separation. Are there things that if you're in that situation, you're coming out of a relationship, and a big relationship, if it's been a married one or a cohabiting one where you've maybe got children or you've had to sort out, all of your finances, your life might have changed in huge and dramatic ways. Are there special considerations when you're bouncing back?
Every breakup is, I really can relate. I've been through my own breakups too, and very serious relationships. I went through one just before the pandemic. And actually, I wouldn't say there's special considerations, but rather the gravity and the time it takes to get over a divorce or a breakup is going to be much bigger depending on how long you've been together and the situations. And actually, one of the things, there's that moment, isn't there, when life as you know it is over. When you hear the news, I want a divorce. When you hear the news, I want to break up. Life as you know it is just completely gone. And our brains get triggered into our fight, flight, freeze mode. And we want to get back to safety. We don't want that life to change. And it's horrible, isn't it? And there's that process of grieving. And I would just say to anyone listening, if you're just going through that, if you've just had that news, is try and find that strength within you and that point of clarity, even though the brain's being triggered, that your life isn't over. And you will rebuild. And although it might seem like your world has crashed down and there's no way back, there is, and it's an opportunity to rebuild stronger and even more of a better future for you than ever. It's hard, if you think about, and this is why it's so important to build healthy relationships together and build that space, because anyone can break up with somebody and ask for a divorce at any point. Nothing is ever final, and I wouldn't want people to think they can never feel safe, but I think it's so important to maintain a level of independence, because if that moment happens again, it won't have to be as devastating, like my life is over. Do you know what I mean, Kate?
Yeah, I think I do. And I guess as well, if you're in that moment, I think it's trying to find the things that can stabilize you so that you don't panic, because I think that the overwhelming feeling when you're told something for the first time is panic, because everything is changing and it feels like there isn't anything that's stable. And when everything's up in the air, that's really hard, because it is really sort of discombobulating, isn't it? But if you can just find the one thing that makes you still put one foot in front of the other, I think it's just finding that one thing to cling on to, isn't it? To just get some sense of stability or normality that allows you to take a breath and allows you to stand back from the situation. And then, as you say, start to make a plan and start to see how you can rebuild your life, and eventually to see it as an opportunity. I think it's really hard in that moment, isn't it, to see it as an opportunity when it happens. But ultimately, I think you're right. That's where we get to, isn't it? That's what keeps us going. That desire to build something again and to build something new.
Yeah, absolutely. In, taking it minute by minute. If you get through a minute without that panic or tear, great. But to also allow yourself that space to grieve, it's a grieving process. The 5 stages of grief, and stepping forward and back is going to happen until you get to that point of peace and acceptance and being able to rebuild. And it's one of the most challenging pieces of life, challenges to get through is a breakup, because people don't prepare you for this. People might somehow prepare you for loss, which is why I love your podcast, Kate, and all the information that you share is that, people, prepare you if you lose a job. People prepare you if you lose a family member to a certain extent. There's lots of support out there. But when it comes to relationships and breakups, there's this shame around it. And then all of a sudden, that person who's received that bad news, whether it's amicable or not, feels alone, feels like they've failed. There's a lot to deal with. Not only is it the pain of the breakup, It's also the societal narratives and wondering, what am I going to tell my parents? Well, I have to take that ring off. Gosh, it's horrible. And so
I'm going to be the odd number at a dinner party or whenever we go out. Yes.
Yeah. All my friends are going to want those funny, dating stories, and they're not funny. They're hard. And, so going back to that initial question, what are the guideposts and what's that advice there? First of all, that space is important. But secondly, especially within a breakup, it's also giving yourself that space and breathing and just building in space to take some breaths, space to allow yourself to cry and grieve, allow yourself to get angry, allow yourself to feel depressed, allow yourself to then feel empowered and accepting it. And most importantly, allow yourself to go through each of those stages within a minute, within an hour, within a day, until eventually you get to the stages of, oh, I feel that I can accept this for a week. And then you might step back again, but it is a grieving process.
And I like the idea that you make that it is cyclical, isn't it? It goes round and round and it's like circles going forward rather than just this nice straight linear progression, because you do go back and forward between those stages and you have good days, good minutes, bad minutes, and eventually good weeks, bad weeks, don't you? And on and on. But yeah, there is a lot of toing and froing for sure. I was interested in what you were saying before about people becoming, I suppose, more relationship savvy, more cognizant of how we relate to each other rather than just expecting it's one of those things you do, you grow up, you get married. People are much more conscious and making more conscious choices about it and about how to make relationships work. Do you think we're becoming more cognizant as a society then around how we break up? Or do you think we're still in the dark ages when it comes to doing breakups well?
Absolutely. There's been progress. And I think that the pandemic has also accelerated this global consciousness of being self-aware. It's nobody's fault. We all have a role to play. Some things, are every relationship is unique and different. However, for every relationship success and with every relationship breakdown, we each have a role to play in that. And people are becoming more self-aware about who they are and subsequently becoming more self-aware about what they need in relationships. And now they're becoming self-aware in how they played a part in the breakdowns and actually wanting to use that as an opportunity to improve their future. So more consciously breaking up. I call it, I think it was first penned in Gwen Paltrow's newsletter in Goop, and it was conscious uncoupling. And, it's just not everyone's there. I think there's a awareness maturity curve that we'll all be going through. And eventually I would love to see everyone doing conscious uncoupling, to take that responsibility once you get past that grieving process. And I think with divorce as well, this is just an incredible time to do it. And mostly people are doing it when it's at a point of divorce and not necessarily, a relationship that was perhaps a year, because you have kids to think about, you have assets to share. So people are already more open, but conscious uncoupling is becoming something that is more common than not. But it's going to take a while.
Well,
for
the
us
term
to
gets bandied around quite a bit, doesn't it? And we do attribute it to Gwyneth, but I don't think it was hers. I think she borrowed it from somebody else, and it's really awful that I can't remember whose name it was that she borrowed it from. But anyway, the point being, what does it mean if you're going to consciously uncouple? What are you doing that's perhaps different to, screaming and shouting at each other, cutting each other's clothes up, throwing people's stuff on the path outside your house? What is conscious uncoupling? What will you be doing if you're consciously uncoupling?
If I could say it in one line, it would be finding that little bit of love left for each other to help each other become more aware of patterns and being able to take away what the other person needed instead as insights to then help you moving forward to break your patterns and create healthier ones. So it's just finding that little bit of love left to learn about how each other had shown up in challenging points, because relationships trigger us. We're not prepared for them. I wish there was a module in school
GCSE,
to teach you how to just,
Me too.
right. And so and actually, as hard as it is, that's when we learn. We learn through relationships, and we learn through breakups, because not everyone is lucky enough to have, modeling family environments to teach us healthy relationships. And even then, our parents and families are dealing with their own triggers too. But actually, it's finding that little bit of love and friendship left and respect for each other, just to share insight. And it doesn't happen immediately. One has to get to a place of acceptance and being able to work through one's own emotions. And I wouldn't say to do this on a regular basis. No, I always recommend 1 or 2 conscious uncoupling check-ins with your ex, really further down the line of the healing process and the divorce proceedings, to meet in a neutral place and show up with parting words. Imagine you're writing a letter, and imagine it being something that comes from a place of understanding and love, not hate. And what would you want?
Not point scoring. Because I think that's the danger, isn't it? That you go to these things thinking you want to get off your chest all the things your partner did not do for you, and then it's not really conscious uncoupling at that point, is it?
No, it's hard to get to that place, to be open. And also there needs to be a lot of trust in your partner that's going to be able to do that for you and with you, and not in a way that's going to, be manipulative or hurt you, because it's quite a vulnerable place to be. And so, having a relationship counselor there is always recommended. But to have a couple of meetings, parting check-ins, just to share any final insights, and what helps is imagining, if this is the last time you're going to see that person, and you had that power to help them improve their future in terms of how they feel and their emotional, well-being, particularly when it comes to relationships, what would you share that could help improve that as an insight?
On the one hand, it feels like a really selfless act. And then if you've got kids, it's almost self-interested in a good way, because if you are going to be linked to your ex-partner forever through your children, why wouldn't you want to get them in the best possible shape? Because it's then better for everybody, isn't it? If you're going to have to remodel yourselves as a family where mum and dad, or mum and mum, or dad and dad aren't together anymore, then but you want the best components of that family still, don't you? Just in the same way you want to invest in your children and help them develop positive relationship skills. It feels like it's almost a natural extension, but incredibly hard to do if you're still in that raw hurt space, to actually invest in your partner's relationship skills as well.
Right. And it's a journey, it's a process. And to be able to get to a point of putting your own, it's almost like this balance, isn't it? It's like you're walking a tightrope. How do I get through this without falling myself, yet at the same time stay stable enough and keep going for my kids, and to do it for the children? And it's just, it takes 2 people who are willing and able to put their hurt and anger aside to prioritize children and getting, it's almost like can people get to the point of rational as quickly as possible to do the best for the child, but then, and then as a secondary, come back to themselves after, to improve it. It's just, oh God, it's not an easy one, but I think more people are starting to be aware that the anger and the pain and the fear are emotions. It's nobody's fault. It happens. And with podcasts like this, like highlighting that there's a process to get there. And that's why I would say space is so important, space to work through those feelings before taking any action.
Exactly. I mean, we call it the emotional journey. And, you start on this journey in different places very often. Somebody usually is an instigator. Not always. Sometimes it's a mutual decision. But even when it's a mutual decision, you can be in quite different places depending on, what's happened and where you've got to and where you feel your own sort of life chances and prospects are. We often deal with people where one feels their career is just on the up and the other feels their career is peaked and is on the down. So, maybe they're late 40s, early 50s, and they're at that point where careers are literally kind of coming up and coming down, crossing over. And it can feel terribly staged to some people whose careers have peaked. So if they've supported the family all the way and their career is on the wane and somebody else is now benefiting, going on that new kind of trajectory, sometimes that feels contrived to people. And so even though it's a mutual decision, it can really feel quite pejorative to some people. And therefore, a mutual decision doesn't guarantee you being in the same emotional space and giving yourselves that time to go through that journey before you start making some of those big decisions about finances and children and those sorts of things. I think that sounds like the perfect time to reach out to this kind of service that you offer and to get that headspace and to get that time to order your thoughts. And like you say, you've got two jobs. You've got to get on board with the rationality as quickly as possible. If you've got kids, to sort out kids and potentially, like you say, a divorce or the financial matters. And then you've got to come back and spend that longer term time when you're looking at, where does my life go from here? What are my future relationships going to be?
Yeah. And how do I feel? Absolutely. And not forget ourselves. Like that tightrope analogy is all just about needing to navigate the rational with the fear. And it's like we have an emotional side, yet we need to stay up and keep moving forward. And it's just so challenging when you have children and a life to rebuild, but it's so easy to forget ourselves in that process and just keep going. And so it's so important to just build in some time to process those feelings. No one, just because the news has been delivered that you're going to go through a divorce or you're breaking up, taking a separation and getting some space, we're also not taught to connect with ourselves and process those feelings and go through that emotional journey. And so in the height of the pandemic, like I said, 9 out of 10 people, most people, 90% were coming to me after a breakup. And also divorce is expensive, is it not? Right? Breakups are expensive. Yeah. Coaching is expensive. How many people do you need? Do you need a lawyer? Do you need a therapist? Do you need more, childcare? It's a lot. So I built the breakup recovery. There's like 21 sessions to help people manage that emotional journey and give themselves the time to do that for themselves and prioritize themselves, even for 5 minutes a day. People don't do that. And I really believe that people don't do that until they're given permission to. And hopefully in that module at school, when they're teaching people how to go and have relationships, they can help them figure out how to just take some time for themselves to process that emotional journey, Kate, for themselves.
Where can people find that journey that you've sort of shaped out for them? Is that in your coaching app?
Yes. It's in the coaching app. It's on demand breakup recovery sessions there where there's guides to work through that emotional journey and at the right time, take the insights away that's going to help your future and then map out a recovery plan. But it does, no one wakes up and can recover instantly. It is a journey and it's there so that, everyone, you've been through this feeling when you've spoken to your friends and family, when you've spoken to your lawyer. And then I don't know about you, but I like to do some yoga and I stretch and I do some yoga and then I lay down and still with my feelings. And there's been moments where I've cried on my yoga mat, and who's there? No one's there. And sometimes you feel like you've exhausted your friends and family and you can't talk about it. Yeah. And it's just there for people to do it alone.
So they can go and download the app. They can go through an emotional breakup recovery series of sessions to get them into a better place to be able to, one, think about their future and two, potentially deal with the breakup that they're going through at the moment and sort things out.
Yeah, exactly.
And just tell us where you can find that. So what's the web address for that one or the download address?
Yes, you can download the self-coaching app. It's called Be What Matters and it's available on both the App Store and Google Play. And you can check out and learn more about the type of coaching that's in there on the website at www.bewhatmatters.co.
That's brilliant. Well, I think that's a really fertile place to start for people who are going through a breakup and a separation. So thank you so much for sharing not just that, but also your insights about how people break up and how we can get better at breaking up. Because I guess if we're going to live longer, the chances are we're going to have more relationships. So we do need to navigate this space with as best skill as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And it was lovely to chat with you today. And I hope to listen to this and join you again soon.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter at Kate_Daly and hear about new podcast episodes by following at divorce_podcast. You can also find out more about our podcast and subscribe for updates by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening.